Hey guys, for today's class, we're going to go over the water cycle diagram. Now, typically during the year when we would have done this in class, you would have been given the diagram and you would have been asked to recreate the diagram, and then this would have been something we would have done as an assessment later. For online learning and for what we're going to use it for, I want to use a diagram as an example, as a visual for me to talk through so you get an understanding of the water cycle more in depth. Then there should be some questions you have to answer afterwards. Okay, so what you see here in front of us is the water cycle. And what you need to remember, the easiest way to think about this is that it's similar to the rock cycle, where it's a cycle. And remember, if you remember the rock cycle from the beginning of the year, in order for it to be a cycle, you had to start and end at the same place. The water cycle acts the same way. You need to start and end in the same area. Now, let's look at the ocean. In this visual, we have a body of water that's already here, which is the ocean. And then we would have our sun up here, wherever you want to put it. And that sun would be heating up the water, turning the water into gas. That gas would then rise, which is how we get evaporation. When the gas is in the atmosphere, it then becomes cooler. It loses heat energy and it condenses into water again. That water then forms clouds. Over time, the clouds become too heavy with water and they fall back down to earth through precipitation. Once it gets to a mountain or to the land, it usually goes through runoff, where there's a hill and the water goes down the hill and back into the ocean. So we started in the ocean, we went to the cloud, we came down, we were on the mountain, we ran off the mountain and back into the ocean. Maybe there's a river there from the mountain, and the water on the mountain goes into the river and then runs down to the ocean. But for this specific instance, we are only worrying about the water going off the mountain. Now, recall, we were in the ocean and then we ended up back in the ocean. That's one complete cycle. Now, another thing, we don't always have to start at a body of water. If you look at our trees, water can leave trees and go to the atmosphere. That process is transpiration. When the leaves and the trees get hot, they start to like sweat. We call it sweat because that's what we do. It's similar to sweat. And they release water from the stomata of the leaves. That water then goes through the process of evaporation. We call it transpiration because it happens in trees and plants. Trees, transpiration. So all you have to understand is that evaporation and transpiration are the same process, but transpiration occurs in plants. So then if we had water in the leaves of trees, our transpiration would occur, we'd go to the cloud, we'd condense into a cloud, and then we would rain and fall back down to the mountain, and we'd run back off. Another thing that I haven't really talked about too much yet is the water can also leak through the ground. It can end up on the ground and leak through or infiltrate into groundwater. And you see the aquifer here as well. The aquifer can also run into the ocean. So there's not one way water moves. Water can move in a variety of places like the rock cycle. And that's what you have to remember. Understand the water can move in a bunch of different ways. It doesn't always have to be the same way, but in order for it to be a cycle, you have to start and end in the same place. Hopefully this gives you a little bit more understanding of how the cycle works. It doesn't always have to be the same thing. Now, another thing I want us to look at, I talked about that. When we were talking about the two factors of the water cycle a day or two ago, I mentioned or I told you that sun and gravity are the two driving factors or the two driving forces of the water cycle. The sun is needed for evaporation and transpiration. Why is that? In order for our water to leave and go into the atmosphere, it has to become a gas. You already know that. Either it leaves from a tree or a plant, or it leaves from the body of water like a lake, an ocean, or a river. Now, in order for that water to get enough energy to become gas, it needs to get its energy from the sun. The sun transfers energy and warms the water right up. It reaches a boiling point and turns into a gas. Then, when it's in the air and we're in the atmosphere and we get condensation and we form clouds, that water falls back down to Earth when it gets too heavy. That's because of gravity. Precipitation occurs because of gravity. Without gravity, water wouldn't come back down to Earth, so we wouldn't have rain, and there we would stop the cycle. Another reason gravity is important is for runoff. I'm sure all of us have rode a bike at this point. When you get on a hill and you ride down that hill, gravity takes you down the hill faster. Usually you don't have to pedal to go fast down a hill. That's because gravity's taking you. Just like you, water can also travel this way. When water is released from the air through precipitation back to the earth, if it hits a hill, the hill carries it back down. And then it normally stops when it gets back into the ocean or into another body of water. So those are the ways these two forces or factors drive the water cycle. Without the sun or gravity, we wouldn't have the continuous cycle of water. Now, recap. You have to start and end at the same place. Your two factors that drive the water cycle are the sun and gravity. And like the rock cycle, you can go and start anywhere in the cycle. And there's a multitude of pathways to go through as long as you start and end at the same cycle. I know, guys, I sound like a broken record at this point. But as long as you get this, we'll be able to do the next part of the unit. Because now we're going to start thinking about why this is important. That's what I want you to start thinking now that you understand the water cycle. Because on Monday we're going to talk about why this is important and why the water cycle is useful and helpful to us as humans. So now at this point for the rest of this class, what I want you to do is take what you've learned from this video and answer the questions that I posted on Google Classroom. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend, guys.